Jo, thank you so much for meeting us here at University of Canberra. As a self-proclaimed activist and not a politician, was there a particular event or circumstance that made you decide now is the time to run?
Look, I've been seriously worried about climate change my whole life. When I was a kid, we called it the greenhouse effect, and I thought it would be fixed by the time I grew up, and it's not. I've been gradually moving further and further into activism, into climate change activism and climate change projects and running companies in the green industries for a long time. I think I probably had a watershed moment at the Glebe Park school strike the other year when there were thousands and thousands of children begging for their lives, and you just, what can you do, you need to do anything that you can do. So when there was an opportunity to represent the Greens, who are doing really effective climate action in Canberra, I thought, yep, that is something I can do, so I should. Because I can, I should.
If elected, how will you approach it differently to a traditional politician?
I think every politician is different. I run a business, and I think that's helpful because you understand how much work goes into putting something together, and you perhaps have a bit more appreciation for not breaking something and for preserving jobs and for preserving something that's been very carefully assembled, which is the opposite of activism in some ways. I think too, I am not really very interested in doublespeak, and I would just like to be very direct. And I find that in my running a company and talking to regular people, you need to be direct in your communication. So I don't think it actually helps anybody. If you have something that somebody doesn't want to hear, you're better off just saying, here is what I think. And if you don't agree, we'll have a chat. But I don't think there are any points to be won by going into some political dodge the question sort of approach.
And do you think that people have responded positively to that approach, the straightforward?
The ones who are receptive to a Greens message have, and the ones who are not have not. So I actually think it's really important. I think watching Australian politics for a little while, I think some of the problems that have happened in climate change and environmentalism is that our politicians are frightened to do what they clearly know they need to do. And I think you're better off saying, here's the problem, here's the science, here's what the experts say, here's what's worked somewhere else, and here's a plan that will work. We're going to do this. If you don't like it, don't vote for us. I think that's actually the right approach. And I think in Australia we're a bit frightened of simply telling people what we think.
We can see that you're very passionate about climate change. If elected, what kind of impact are you hoping to have on the ACT?
Sure. So the reason I'm standing with the Greens is I've seen that we've had a massive impact here. So we've got 100% renewable electricity, which is absolutely amazing. There is no other jurisdiction in Australia that has managed to do that. And I remember standing at a rally 10 years ago, hearing Caroline Lakuta, the Greens MLA, saying by 2020 we'll have 100% green electricity. And I sort of thought, oh, that's crazy Greens talk. That's never going to happen. And over the last decade, that has happened. So more of that. What we need to do now is not discuss or debate what's going on. We simply need to roll out the solutions that are working. The Greens have put together a really good get-off gas package to help people transition from fossil fuel gas onto renewable electricity. We'll roll that out. We've just launched an electric vehicle package to help people buy new electric vehicles, and I'm really excited about that one. I ride a lot. I love active transport. I love public transport, but in Canberra we're going to have a lot of cars as well. So we need to make sure as many of those cars as possible are electric, not fossil fuel. So I think it's a lot of those very, very practical policies and programs that actually work, that have been demonstrated to work in other countries. We're not using cutting edge technology. This is all very, very proven and simple. It's just about putting in the right subsidies and putting in the right frameworks.
With the electric cars, the proposed policy is hoping to see 90% of new cars being bought by 2030 being electric. Do you think this is ambitious? Is it achievable?
I think it's massively ambitious, and just as I thought it was crazy in 2010 to say we'll be 100% renewable electricity by 2020, I think in 2020 you look ahead to 2030 and say, oh, how's that going to happen? I think it actually is achievable. Electric vehicles have come along so fast in technology and uptake now that Australia has fallen so far behind, they are now ready to transition. So there's a lot of countries in the world where they've actually said, right, we are no longer allowing petrol and diesel cars, we're no longer allowing ICE cars to be sold here. And we're not quite there, obviously. We need to start by encouraging the uptake of electric vehicles. But I think it will happen, and once we start, it'll happen very quickly. The only barrier at the moment really is cost. They're still quite expensive. And when you're travelling interstate, there's not as much infrastructure as we need. And these are really easy problems for the governments to assist with. And that's what we've done in our package. And I think there's a bit of a neighbourhood effect with EVs. The second you drive one, you suddenly realise that it's just a nice normal car that works. And as soon as you start seeing everybody using those, and as soon as the new EVs start filtering down into the second-hand market, I think we're going to find a very, very quick turnaround uptake. So yeah, it is ambitious, but I think it's realistically ambitious.
Do you think the Canberra culture will be welcoming of electric cars? We seem to have a bit of a car culture here in Canberra.
We do, yeah.
Do you think they'll welcome the change?
I think they're embracing it. It's interesting. Of all the Greens policies, and some people love Greens policies and some people hate them no matter what you tell them about Greens policies. I've had more people come up to me and rave about our electric vehicle policy than I've ever experienced before. And it's quite interesting. EVs cuts across a lot of different groups. So there's environmentalists, and that was a lot of the early adopters were environmentalists, but it's also the rev heads, and there's Tim Miller, who runs Lids for Kids. Like, he's doing a conversion for Summernats at the moment to take his classic cars and turn them into EVs. And
that's amazing.
Yeah, so it cuts across all these. There's the techies. There's a lot of different groups that are very ready for EVs. And honestly, the only problem there has been we've had so much negative financial signalling and negative messaging from federal government saying EVs don't work. That's the reason we don't have them. It's not because they don't work. They're marvellous cars. It's because we've just had all the wrong messaging coming from the top.
How many charging stations are you planning to build throughout Canberra?
What we've found with EVs in the early days didn't drive very far. Range was a problem. The new EVs that you buy now have really big range, so they will usually drive 300 or more kilometres. So what we have found from the EV community is they tend to drive the car during the day and then plug it in at home into their socket. Most of them just plug it into a wall socket. So they actually don't need a charging station. You still need charging stations for tourism. So when people travel between cities and travel around, we need charging stations there. And look, we're scoping that out at the moment. There's quite a lot of mapping tools that show you where the charge stations are. They're not going to be sufficient unless we build more, and we factored that into the package of encouraging businesses to build more charging stations. There's a lot of opportunity. It's sort of hard to pick exactly how it's going to go. There's a lot of opportunities. I think businesses that sell food and petrol stations at the moment, and any business that wants you to stop there and spend money on their products, has a really big incentive to jump in and build a charging station. And that's what we're going to encourage a lot more of. The other big barrier in Canberra has been in units in apartments. So we actually did manage to get a legislative change to require new apartments to provide sockets. It's just a plug. It's literally just a regular electrical plug socket that you need. And a lot of the car parks and apartments haven't had those. So I think we're going to have to put a big effort in on that. And that's not so much the government building those as the government coming in, making sure the codes are implemented, and then working with bodies, corporate and developers, and making sure that every car park has a socket installed, which is not the case right now.
The Greens also plan to lift the quality and sustainability of new infrastructure and building. Could you give me an example of how future planning might work?
So planning legislation is a monster to reform. And we've done a bit of work chipping away at that over the years, but we have launched a big planning package to reform that a lot more for sustainability. We've introduced a climate change trigger, so we want new developments to include the ongoing energy footprint, to make sure that we're building them in a better way, so that we're not building these housing development and properties that will be sapping massive amounts of electricity for the next 50 years when they can be built in a better way. We want to raise the energy efficiency standards on all new buildings, and it comes down to 1,001 tiny decisions that get made when the building is first made, which is simple things like double glazing, triple glazing, insulation, orientation is often not done very well. So it's a lot of these really minor choices that often don't have much of a cost impact at the start, but then leave whoever is occupying that building with a 50-year energy and financial bill that they have to pay that can't be changed later on.
Do you think companies like Geocon and the big building companies will be able to fulfil these plans?
Yes, they will. What we often look to other places. We have developed some fairly unique things in the ACT and in the ACT Greens, but we're often modelling quite closely on what is happening in other countries. And what we've found with our building standards and planning regulations is at the start, when you change standards, there is an uptick in cost. One of my advisors was telling me it cost 20% more, I think, in the UK when they increased their standards. And then within a few years, the industry has just sort of adapted to that, and then it costs the same or it costs less. So it's really just a matter of deciding what you think needs to be done, setting that down very clearly, talking to the people who are involved and the stakeholders and making sure everybody is able to do this and understands it, and then implementing it and sticking to it. And then within a few years, the industry has adjusted.
Are you anticipating a pushback on this one?
We'll probably get pushback. We get pushback on all our policies. There's always pushback on change. Yes, we're anticipating pushback, and there's pushback on quite a lot of Greens policies. What I have learned over the years is that a good idea implemented well is very hard to argue with. So we talk to everybody, and you need to get the information, and you need to write your regulations and write your policies and write your subsidies in the right way to make sure you don't accidentally miss somebody out or do something in the wrong way, or you've fallen behind and you're looking at something that was great 10 years ago and is no longer sort of industry standard. But you need to be careful not to get too frightened of pushback or conflict, because generally speaking, an idea done well, within 6 months it's impossible to argue against it. And I would say that is what's happened with the entire renewable industry. Renewable electricity is now cheaper than coal-fired and gas-fired electricity, and the only way those industries can continue at all is with massive federal government subsidies. They've now fallen behind. So you've got to be careful not to listen too hard to the pushback. Listen to the information, but don't worry too much about conflict, I think.
Part of the building plans include 1,000 new homes, public and social housing. The Labor is proposing 240.
Yep.
If you're to make a coalition government again, how are you going to compromise on that?
What happened with our last coalition government is we formed a parliamentary agreement, and in that document we set down the things we really wanted to deliver that we thought were very, very important. And there are 105 of those, I think. And we said these things need to be delivered in the next 4 years, otherwise we no longer support this coalition. And Labor said, yep, we'll support those things, and we understand that we need to deliver those. And we actually got 80% of those delivered in that 4 years, so it was a very effective process. I cannot say exactly what would go in the next parliamentary agreement. I can't even say if there will be one. We don't know if we'll have enough seats. We don't quite know what will happen after the election. But I imagine if we formed a coalition government, we would do that again. We would have a parliamentary agreement, and we would say, here are the things that are very important to us, and we need to have these things delivered in the next 4 years, or you will no longer receive our support in the Assembly. And I imagine we are pretty focused on that housing package. So I think we will do whatever we can to deliver that. It's come out as one of the biggest equity issues in Canberra. The housing affordability crisis is real. There are people who are homeless. There's a lot of young people who can't afford rent. We have costed it. We have a lot of people working in the field. We know how many houses we need to build to clear that backlog and to make sure everybody has a home, and that's it. And we're going to deliver it any way we can.
What else do you anticipate the Greens would put on that priority list?
climate change. Yeah, it's until we have those discussions, I can't say, and it obviously wouldn't be me necessarily. It'll be the party and the party discussing with Labor, and it's a negotiation like any other negotiation. But I think we are very, very focused on our housing affordability package. We're very focused on our climate change initiatives. And look, honestly, we have an awful lot of support for our climate change initiatives. We come up with the policy, but Labor almost always has adopted our climate change policy. I can't think of any example where they haven't, actually. So I suspect those will go in. I imagine we got 105 items in our last parliamentary agreement, which is a lot. So I imagine we will probably be able to deliver most of our policy, but it's difficult to say until you get into that room.
The Territory is just a small place. Yep. What kind of big change can you make in regards to climate change?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a question we get all the time. I think a lot of people are more worried about what's happening nationally and globally, which is completely understandable. For me, the best thing we can do in the ACT is to roll out good ideas, make them work, and then take them up to the national stage. So I am really happy when Shane comes. He goes up to COAG and he talks to all of the other states and territories and the federal government about energy policy. And a lot of people in that room will say, renewables don't work, they don't provide enough power, it's too expensive. And Shane can now say, it's not too expensive, we have the second cheapest electricity in the country, we haven't had a blackout, it works, and it's impossible to argue against that. So actually I think what we need to do in the ACT is model a sustainable city that works in 1,000 different ways, and then take it out to the national stage and say, here's something that works, life continues, life is good, maybe it costs a little bit less, maybe it costs a little bit more, it's affordable, and this is the way of the future.
Something that works here in Canberra, how do you think it would translate to a bigger state like South Australia or Western Australia?
Depends on what it is. Some problems are inherently local. So I think transport is a really good one where every city and region really needs to look at their own transport, and we're very car focused and we've got different public transport than other cities have, so what works here may not work in other places. Having said that, EVs will work anywhere there are cars, so that's a given. Some issues do respond really well to a bit more of a cut and paste model, but I guess it comes down to the adaptation and the implementation. So energy grids are quite complicated, but renewables aren't complicated at all. So if you can have solar and wind in lots of different formats with big farms and little rooftop systems and maybe some battery storage and community grids and all of that mix, that complexity of mix is actually really good for your energy grid, and that will work everywhere. It'll look different everywhere. So, Adelaide will have a different energy mix, and so will Sydney, and so will Melbourne, and so will Hobart, but they'll all be able to draw on the same sort of technologies and probably the same business models. We've had some really good success pioneering some new business models, so we run a reverse auction, which you might have heard about, which we ran for our renewables, and we're now using that for a lot of our environmental initiatives, where we state the outcome we want and companies bid, and then we get a really good price, and we also get a mix of lots of different businesses delivering those services, and we're finding that model works in a lot of places, and you'll get different businesses and different technologies will bid for that, and that's a really good way to go.
From talking to students here at UC, we've noticed a disconnect between young people and the local government. They're not interested anymore. Is there something that you and your party could be doing differently to draw that interest back in?
I agree, and I think we need to talk to young people more. I think for every established body, there is a risk that you end up talking to the same old familiar faces and the same old familiar organisations who have a direct channel, and that is not the right way to find out what's happening. In the Greens, we're lucky. We have a lot of young people directly involved in the party, which is really good. One of my support candidates is 24 years old. One of the support candidates in another jurisdiction is 20. So we have some young people who are actually running as candidates, which is very helpful. And we have quite a lot of young people who are actively involved in our policy, but we need to keep working on it. Yeah, and it was quite difficult this year. We were very keen to run a lot of really good Greens activities with UC, and then COVID hit. And the campus life has changed, and a lot of the young people they've lost their shifts, they've maybe lost their homes, they've moved back home with mum and dad. Like, life has changed so much, it's actually quite difficult to talk to them right now because they're struggling with so much going on. But yeah, look, we're always looking for ways to engage better with youth, and there are different issues that affect people at different stages of their life, and you need to make sure you're actually talking to regular human beings in all of those stages.
With the COVID, a lot of people have gone back online. Do you think you should be doing more with social media or online connections to reach out to those who have retreated?
Yes, absolutely. Come and teach us. Yeah, we absolutely should. We've got a couple of, unfortunately with social media, it depends on the skills of the individual. And we've got a couple of people in the team who are really good at it, and quite a lot of us who aren't so good at it. So we definitely should be. I've noticed, I think it's great for democracy that we've pivoted so fast to Zoom meetings and forums, and that's really good. So what I've noticed in election debates is where once upon a time you'd have maybe 10 people in a town hall, you've now got 50 or 100 or 300 people now able to access that forum really well, and I think we need to do a lot more of that. I'd love to have a chat. I'll have a chat to you after the interview about which channels are actually best for engaging more with young people, because I think we probably do have a bias towards picking channels that suit older people better.
Well, we know you have lots of campaigning to do. Thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.